Hi Ellie, how are you? Wait just a second for me to pass the mic.
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time out to.
Thank you as well. I know that it's midnight there and it's morning here, so I appreciate as well. So I think that we can start. Would you like to start to give the initial argument or okay? So. Um, First and foremost, based on the debate motion that Obama was an effective, successful president overall, what I wanted to say, especially because I'm not a U.S. citizen and I have not been to the U.S., so I'm only watching the events there from, let's say, from an outside perspective. I can say that Obama was an effective president based on both the way he handled internal politics, internal policies, as well as the international uh, political relations. He was an effective president because, um, from what I've seen, he had quite an opposition, especially in the Congress. But he still managed to pass certain essential policies. And I'm saying this in terms of at least passing the policies. We can talk a little bit later about analyzing the effectiveness of those policies specifically. And then he was effective on the international level because part of his initiatives, especially regarding certain regimes, uh, were eventually effective in terms of certain dictatorships being removed, with U.S. leading the charge. Um, and again, we can talk separately about how those processes were actually performed, or how Americans eventually viewed the fact that the U.S. got so involved in international relations. But he was effective because he said that he's going to do certain things, and eventually the goal was achieved, the one that he declared initially. I'll pass the mic to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And just for the record, it's Eli, pronounced Eli, but that's okay. And I love the view behind you, by the way. Of is that Dubai? Is that what that is? Okay. Well, I've never been there. I've always wanted to go. It's on my bucket list. But you said some interesting things, and I think it's worth remembering some of the when this president came in, he ran on many promises. And we're talking about his effectiveness and success as a president. There's a lot to scrutinize. There's a lot to criticize. And in doing my research, the bulk of what I've seen from the people who are pro Obama. Now, keep in mind, I did not vote for Donald Trump, but I also did not vote for Hillary Clinton. I did vote for Barack Obama in 2008, but I did not vote for him again, like many of his young supporters in 2012, where his margin of victory wasn't quite as big as it was in 2008. But by and large, people will give a reference to Obamacare as one of his legacy items. They'll also give they talk about how he was a leader in climate change and how he killed Osama bin Laden, and that the unemployment rate is low. These are the main talking points of all of the pro Obama legacy talking heads, the pundits, basically. But these things are easily refutable when you just dig a little bit into the numbers and into the statistics. But before I really do that, let's talk a little bit about the promises he made when he ran for president. He promised to, he committed to unprecedented transparency. But in 2014, a New York Times article came out how his is the most was a more secretive this was 2014, mind you, a more secretive administration than George W. Bush, and his was pretty bad. And but they compared the transparency, and he completely failed on that promise. He has one of the most non-transparent administrations in the history of our country. I mean, just look what happened with the basically spying on Americans, the NSA, Edward Snowden. He also promised to close Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay. It didn't happen. He wanted to completely win the war, basically end the war in Iraq, and finish basically and also in Afghanistan. That didn't happen. He promised to be principled, like tough and principled in his national security, when he has killed a tremendous amount of people. I mean, he in 2013. There was a drone strike every 3 days, and more in the stretch from 2010 to 2013, more civilians were killed in the form of collateral damage than at any other time in any other administration. So he's a very violent kind of warmongering president. Let's see. He promised not to raise taxes on the middle class. He didn't keep that promise. Taxes went up. He also failed to grow the incomes of the American middle class. He promised that when the Affordable Care Act came out, that people would be able to keep their providers, keep their plans, and their costs would lower. All three of those things ended up being lies, especially the tax portion. He specifically said it would not be a tax, but then it got through the Supreme Court as a tax. And that was how they got it through the Supreme Court, because Congress is allowed to tax the people. And that's how it passed through. Let's see what else. He wanted to make immigration a top priority. He really planned on immigration being one of his calling cards by the time he left office. He botched it. He had a Democratic legislative branch, and he did not get it done. And he didn't get it done just in time for the 2012 reelection, where the Hispanic vote was crucial for him. So obviously having that promise really helped him win that Hispanic vote. What was the term he used? He wanted to nail shut the revolving door of lobbyists. That has not happened. Lobbyists have grown by 13% since he has taken office in 2008. And he promised a bipartisan agenda. Look, Obama has been famous for saying that he hasn't been able to work with Congress, and he keeps blaming Congress. He just keeps blaming those darn Republicans. And I'm not a Republican, but a good president. I mean, we saw this from Reagan and to some effect Clinton and even Bush. They were able to still get legislation through. You referenced that he passed policies. He wrote them by executive order. Did he write as many executive orders as George W. Bush? No, but it's the scope of those orders that are material. And so when he couldn't get things done, he just executive ordered everything, which will end up being to his detriment in the long term. His legacy is hanging by a thread, because the incoming president, President Trump, will likely overturn every single one, or nearly every single one, of those executive orders. So when you say pass, he really just wrote it up. And his legacy will likely fall because a lot of it's built on those executive orders.
Thank you, Eli. Apologies for mispronouncing your name. When I was doing, I have to admit, I was doing just an overall basic research. Again, because I'm not there, and I'm not also feeling the context directly there. I think that this debate can go either way in terms of the way the motion was phrased. Obama was an effective, successful president overall. if we eliminate any of those words, effective, successful, or overall, the debate can go again either way. When I was doing a little bit of research, there are lots of articles online talking about Obama's achievements or Obama's failures. You'll see that most of the times, as you said, some of the achievements that his supporters are always quoting. When you go in depth and analyze the process, even with Obamacare, uh, you'll see that there are some flaws in the process. The supporters list the main achievement as a big win, and then the ones who don't support him go and analyze the process and say, okay, this was an executive order instead of actually a collaboration with the Congress, and it was actually it turned out to be a tax, and in the long run it will be overturned by the new president, and so on. So most of his achievements, as I see them, um, might be overturned in the new presidency. I was watching recently an interview of Obama with Trevor Noah, and Trevor Noah asked kind of a similar question. So you're bragging about Obamacare, but Obamacare will be like overturned like this. And he said, well, let's look at the legislative process. And he said it cannot be overturned just in like a matter of weeks. It will take about 2 years for the whole process to be overturned, because he was saying, by the way, he was saying in the interview, sign up for Obamacare. And Trevor Noah was like, why do you say so? And he said, you can still get Obamacare for the next few years, and Obamacare can still become more effective in terms of the numbers and in terms of the amount of healthcare it will eventually provide until it is being overturned. So I think that uh, it's a very, very fine line in terms of effectiveness. It's a very fine line regarding each of the policies that he passed, or each of the, and I'm talking again internal policies, and also each of the international actions that he did. So um, if you look at the let's say the tip of the iceberg level in the international relations, when he said, okay, I'm going to end the war in Iraq, I'm going to catch bin Laden, etc., etc., um, if you look very bluntly, yes or no, he managed to kind of to check the box for that. Um, and then when you look again at the process, how he did it, um, uh, probably he didn't do it in the perfect manner. And now we're talking about different factors, including the Congress. Um, but talking about effectiveness, this is why what I want to focus on, because this is the debate motion. Talking about effectiveness, he managed to accomplish certain goals that he declared at the beginning. Um, and to conclude my part here, to give you the mic, um, I agree that he had a lot of promises at the beginning, through which he won votes of certain target audiences. The idea is that I think that with each presidency, you need to prioritize at a certain point based on how much support you will get, or how fast you can actually pass a certain process. So I think that with some of the promises, uh, he actually realized that at a certain moment in time that he will not be able to control all the forces in such a manner to pass legislation, or to actually achieve that goal. So I think that he fought very hard for certain priorities that he was thinking, okay, I might be able to achieve them. So this is why I'm again focusing so much on effectiveness, whether he managed to do it or not. I'm gonna pass the mic.
Well, I will grant you that every president has promised things and can't necessarily always make good on those promises. Donald Trump has laid out his list of things he wants to accomplish in his first 100 days. It's a pretty tall order. I love a lot of the things on that list, but there's some things I don't, or I think that are unrealistic. But by and large, I think it is a freedom related agenda. But back to Obama and effectiveness, these metrics are using the metrics, they do speak to his effectiveness. With Obamacare, yes, 15 million people who didn't have insurance now have insurance. But remember, they were also coerced to do that, or they would incur a tax penalty if they didn't get insurance. And a lot of these people didn't want to get it, but they didn't want to have to pay what would end up being 3, 4, 5, and then next year for the 2016 taxes, $600 for a penalty. They would just rather just get the insurance and instead of pay the penalty. But when you look at that, is that really a measure of effectiveness? Because when you look at the reason that people didn't get it was economy, and I know that people quote the 4.9% unemployment rate that we're seeing right now as a like a good job, Obama. Here's a great legacy metric for him. He reduced unemployment, but the number of people that have dropped out of the labor force who are no longer working is 13 million. So speaking to effectiveness, how effective is having 15 million more people on insurance, arguably coerced to do so, versus 13 million people not even working anymore, which obviously increases Medicaid and welfare expenditures, and is a tax burden. More than 50% now, because of Obama's administration, more than 50% of the people in America are on government assistance of some kind, in some way. More than half now. Again, this is a measure of effectiveness. Does the president? No matter who's in office, I'm always leery of people blaming the president for every good or bad thing. I think the president's powerful, but they're not that powerful to where, for example, I think economic ebbs and flows precede what a presidential administration can accomplish. Does that make sense? I think that the ebbs and flows of economy are a bigger beast and can't really be lassoed too much by an administration. They can do some things that do affect it, but I think by and large, when we go through recessions or go through booms, I don't necessarily chalk that up to a president. So I'm not going to blame Bush for the crash of 2008. But I also am not going to blame Obama for the U6 unemployment rate, which is 9.7%. The U3 unemployment is 4.9, and that's the one they like to say. But when you count in the people who aren't working anymore or the long-term unemployment, it's really 9.7. So I'm not going to necessarily fault him for that either. But I just want to, as a point of metrics, it is important to make that difference. Let's see what else here I wanted to say. This is from an article from journalist Julian Zelgier. He says, speaking to his programs, we're talking about effectiveness here. His programs tended to be extraordinarily complex, dependent on Byzantine regulatory mechanisms rather than direct federal intervention. So they would be more palatable to moderates. Rather than have the government provide health insurance for all, the Affordable Care Act created exchanges and mandates. The Dodd-Frank bill did not send did not bring about strong regulations to enforce reform on Wall Street, but rather a complex web of rules and incentives. So when he couldn't win, and this goes back to what we were saying, when he couldn't win support in the legislative body, he would just executive order everything, which can easily be undone. That's a measure of effectiveness. I mean, if you're creating policies and rules that can be undone like that by just the guy coming in to fill your seat next, how effective is that really?
Thank you, Eli. So I'm gonna go a little bit back to the example that I gave with his interview with Trevor Noah, and I'm gonna refer also to effectiveness. He said also one important thing there. He said, "Look, when you're facing a lot of adversity from a lot of factors of society, you have to work around them in order to achieve certain things." With Obamacare, he said something was needed at a national level. There wasn't such a thing before that in the presidencies before him. A lot of other presidents, from what I know, at the general level, try to achieve kind of a national healthcare policy. And he said, "I'm not claiming that Obamacare is perfect as a system. It might be very complex because of the fact that it had to be very appealing to many types of audiences with different requirements, but uh, he the fact that he managed to pass it, again, I'm gonna use it as a measure of effectiveness, even though it might have been an executive order, which is a more forceful way to pass a law, but he passed it in order to activate it. And then I think that we will actually be able to measure the effectiveness of it after it reaches kind of a critical mass of US citizens, a critical mass that I think he mentioned to be at around more than 30 million US citizens, in order to actually see if it had a good impact in terms of the kind of the healthcare that it offers. So I think that we're still a long way before analyzing the effectiveness of the process. The Again, my idea and my main debate argument here is that he managed to pass policies, even the one that you mentioned, the Dodd-Frank, and some of the other policies that managed to steer the country from the financial crisis, with the auto industry and with the creation of new jobs. He managed to pass some policies that are potentially going to be overturned, but not in the next weeks, in the next years. And until then, we will be able to also measure their effectiveness, because in 1 or 2 years, you'll be able to take a step back and see, okay, so this actually provided that much money to this number of people, and this actually changed certain stats in a specific way. So also with the unemployment, it's not, from my point of view, it's not if we compare, it's not as bad as it used to be at certain moments in time in the presidencies before him. So he managed to steer the country in a certain positive direction. I'm not saying that he did it perfectly. He achieved all his goals or all his promises, but he managed to change something. There were certain presidencies where the promises were just made for the sake of promises, for getting the votes, but when the president actually came into office, those promises were completely forgotten. Nobody actually had a specific intention on acting on those promises. While from an effectiveness point of view, he tried to act on most of the promises he did. And when he acted, he passed certain policies that improved somehow the situation. Not fully, not 100%, not 150%, but somehow improved the situation in certain areas.
Thank you. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is his promise to have more transparency, but he re-signed the Patriot Act, which is the king legislation of spying on Americans by the American government. So I don't necessarily, I guess I don't agree that he intended or even still intends to do all he can to meet all of his promises. I think he made promises to get elected, like all politicians do. This is not exclusive to Barack Obama. But this guy has shipped out, he has deported more illegal immigrants than George W. Bush, than Ronald Reagan. Over something 2.5 million, I think 2.5 million deportations, and this guy promised to basically facilitate illegal immigration. This was something that he kind of even at one point in joking, and during this election cycle, he even said something along the lines of, "Come over, come over and vote. We'll let people vote." Talking about obviously illegal immigrants, but so I guess I don't think that he's been effective in keeping his promises. I'm not sure. Maybe he intended to. Maybe he had stars in his eyes. Maybe he was green behind the ears, young, naive, full of maybe a little too much hope. Although I don't think that's a bad thing. But maybe you're right. Maybe he just his eyes were bigger than his stomach. Maybe you're familiar with that phrase. So I think he just bit off more than he could chew, and maybe he just couldn't quite keep those promises. But nevertheless, he failed to effectively keep them. Another thing that we all thought, and by the way, I was so proud when we as a country elected our first African American president. I thought that was an important moment for our country. I thought that as a sidebar, I didn't think, obviously that's not the reason to vote for someone, nor do I think gender is a reason to vote someone, especially for the office of president of the United States. But we're seeing a divide. Not only are we seeing a divide racially in America, and did you live here for any period? Have you lived here for any period of time? No. Okay. Being here and experiencing it is quite the thing. I mean, especially I'm 34. I just didn't grow up with race. Just wasn't an issue in my community. It wasn't an issue even in my city of Columbus, Ohio. But now it really is nationwide. There's also a divide in Washington, bigger than has been in years, really since the Reagan days. I mean, since the Carter days. Reagan did a good job of bringing the two parties together, but at least in his first term. But I'm seeing this gridlock, and this leads to ineffectiveness. He hasn't been effective in being able to work with the Congress to get good common sense legislation passed. Here's the reality of a president, what we call a lame duck president, who has a legislative body of the opposite party. That president has been expected throughout history to compromise a little more on new legislation than the party in power. And we've seen presidents in history do that, but he just hasn't done that. He said, "My way or the highway," knowing that he would get pushback from a Republican Congress who would say, "Well, this isn't even a compromise. This is just as straight. These are just straight liberal policies. You can't expect us to vote this into law for you to sign. I mean, that's just, we couldn't do that. We'd have to compromise." And he said, "My way or the highway," which almost always led to him having to sign the executive order. But then it also gave him a political chip to play. It gave him the soundbite. "I have a Congress that won't work with me." Well, he wouldn't work with Congress either. So it really does go both ways. A lack of effectiveness there. Let's see. I wanted to, I will actually close with that. But that I'll make that point, and what I'll do is I'll pass the mic over to you now.
Thank you, Eli. I also wanted to touch on another point regarding his let's say his international attitude, and not only like his attitude as a president in terms of personality. But before that, I want to comment a little bit on what you said. And again, this is just an outside perspective. I've seen, for example, how Republicans are acting in this election, and the kind of the strength and the lack of flexibility in terms of their views regarding different issues. And I think that while Obama may have said in some ways "my way or the highway," Republicans have had a specific lack of flexibility, and they've shown it time and time again during several presidencies. And they've declared it since the very beginning when Obama was first elected that we're going to fight against this president. So when you say it's going both ways, I think that Obama had this declared hostility from them from the very beginning. So this is why I'm always trying to get the context as an outside person, to try to understand what happened chronologically speaking. So when he came into office, he already knew what he was facing. So I would take this with a pinch of salt in terms of how he acted in order to pass some policies. I don't think it was his strategy from the very beginning to just do executive orders in order to pass policies or create policies that are fully liberal. Again, he was playing a political game at the end of the day, and he knew that he has hostility from the very beginning. So probably these were some moves in order to also highlight the lack of flexibility of the Republican controlled Congress. This is just my outside perspective, uh, judging by the chronology of it. Now, a point that I wanted to make before my time is over. Um, I've seen several presidents of the United States acting in public, talking to the people, talking to journalists, um, um, talking to other presidents of the world, and to be honest, this was one of the presidents of the states who was quite knowledgeable, quite diplomatic, and quite effective in terms of getting his not his ideas, the US ideas across, again, both internally and internationally. And I want to also focus on this aspect of his personality, because looking back at Bush, and now looking at the way Trump acts in international relations, especially, um, I think that as a measure of effectiveness, comparing both the previous one and the next one, we will see in time that he was quite effective in highlighting and implementing certain ideas, especially at an international level, which from my point of view, won't be the case anymore with the next one. So in terms of behavior, the knowledge factor, I think that he was quite effective. I'll pass the mic to you to have a little bit more time left.
He was certainly President Obama is certainly a good speaker. He's a charming person. I think from a diplomatic standpoint, I could see why the international community was drawn to him. He certainly tried. I mean, he did go on what many would call an apology tour when he came into office, basically apologizing for the sins of America. And don't get me wrong, our government has done a lot of bad things, but also, and his hands aren't completely clean. When he assumed office, I think the United States was currently bombing in one way or another 2 countries, and that number is now 7. We're bombing more countries now with President Obama, and even though I'm not in the international community, I mean international to you, yes, but to America, obviously, I'm domestic. But even I know the majority of the American people don't like the American aggression. Barack Obama has. He wanted to be that guy that wanted to pull America out of places in the world, militarily speaking, but he hasn't. He's beefed it up. We have troops in like over 100 countries. We have troops everywhere, and maybe you agree with me, but I don't think that leads to peace. I think that when you're bombing countries and when you've got military soldiers in communities, I think that creates enemies. So while he may have been well received diplomatically, and it certainly was good for press, and I think that the Iran nuclear deal, I think that was doomed from the beginning. That's obviously going to be overturned by Donald Trump. I also don't think it was the wisest foreign policy move, but other than that, other than some good visits. And some sit downs. Ending the embargo with Cuba, I have mixed feelings about that, but by and large, I think I kind of am a fan of it more than I am not a fan of it. So I guess that's something that I would give him credit for doing from a foreign policy standpoint. But by and large, he doesn't have accomplishments on foreign policy. His one big foreign policy accomplishment is the Iran nuclear deal. Benghazi and Libya in Iraq and Afghanistan. These were all kind of by and large failures that have led to the rise of the Islamic State. I'll go ahead and close, and I'll give you the last word. But I wanted to say here, this is the last point. When he got into office, here's what he said. The problem is, this is Obama. The problem is that the way Bush has done it over the last 8 years is to take out a credit card from the Bank of China in the name of our children, driving up our national debt from $5 trillion for the first 42 presidents. Number 43 added, in other words, Bush added $4 trillion on his own, so that we now have over $9 trillion of debt that we're going to have to pay back. $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country, and that's irresponsible. It's unpatriotic. He's doubled it. Now we're almost basically at $20 trillion. Every economic bona fides that Obama may have earned has been on the backs of debt. The bailout was all debt to the tune of $20 trillion. So that's how he has buoyed up his legacy. And his legacy is going to fail because it's all executive orders that are going to be overturned. And he's made every American owe lots and lots of money. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eli. I'm gonna be quick. In terms of legacy, I think we need to in a political correct way, we will need to agree to disagree in terms of analyzing his legacy, kind of the long way. So I think we'll need to wait to actually see what the legacy brings. And then in terms of the economical actions, we will need to see that he had to do something about, especially the crisis, in order to react and improve the situation in this current